This is not a journey I would have chosen for my life.
Forgiveness is powerful. It is powerful. It can bring about great change in your life when you just loose that person and let them go.
And she taught me how to forgive. I have a past of things that made me a hostile, angry person. As a result of seeing forgiveness through her, I was able to go back in my life and forgive some things.
I had to do what was necessary to get through this and to heal. And the only way I was going to do that was by facing what happened, talking about it, and seeing what I could do for someone else.
I don't use the word forgiveness. I'd rather see that put through action between people. To me, that's more important.
Forgiveness, to me, is not some social expectation. It's not some should. It's not some saintly act like I forgive you and I forget it. No, 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 no. Forgiveness is far more than that. Forgiveness is a gift of awakening. It's a gift of freedom.
The peace that people want out of forgiveness, they want it wrapped up all in a bundle and all neat and tied up, and therefore they don't have to worry about this murder that happened affecting them in any way, because blah, blah, forgive, blah, blah. So it's all done, and there. Poof. And that part of forgiveness doesn't relate to me in any way. I don't like it. It upsets me.
It just seems like forgiveness is a really tough thing for people to live up to, you know? They can say it, but they don't always mean it, or they just won't think that way at all.
On the other hand, when we did this restorative justice process and met at the prison, there was many things that happened that could be defined as forgiveness by someone else.
The healing circle, I believe, was another step moving forward, another step in the healing process, coming full circle for me.
We have to learn how to forgive. I know a lot of harm has been done in the community. Living with worry is like just on a rocking chair, you know, it doesn't take you anywhere.
I don't have this huge weight that I've been carrying around, this huge bag full of bitterness, full of hatred, full of anger.
Restorative justice is really a paradigm shift. I mean, it's a different way of viewing, understanding, and responding to crime. You know, crime is not just a violation of some code. It's against people. Restorative justice is this broad umbrella. The most widely used, the most research-based, empirically validated forms of restorative justice are what I call restorative justice dialogue. That's a different umbrella.
And in the circle, we want everybody to have a chance to say what's important to them. A talking piece indicates who has the floor, essentially, who has the right to speak.
And restorative justice dialogue involves programs and processes where those most affected by the crime, the victim, the offender, their families, community people, other support people, where they have opportunities to come face to face after preparation, to talk about the impact on their lives, to work on ways of developing plans to repair the harm.
Good morning. Welcome to this Restorative Justice Talking Circle.
I'm Mary. And on February 12th, 1993, my only son was murdered. He was 20 years old at the time.
I'm O'Shea. I was incarcerated. I committed a murder. Was found guilty of a murder. I had finally hit my boiling point from a lot of things that I was dealing with. And in hindsight, I can say I brought a lot of my issues, a lot of my frustrations out on the wrong person, put it on the wrong face, and made a victim of someone who had no idea what I was going through, who, you know, was just living his life.
When they identified his body, I went into the bathroom and I was questioning God. Hatred began to set in. It's all over. I'll never see him again. I will never celebrate Christmas or a birthday or never see him with children. 2 days after my son was murdered, I received a call from the detectives. And he told me that he had picked up a boy, 16 years old, that had taken my son's life. All I wanted was for this young man this boy to get prison. He was an animal. I hated him. He needed to be caged, and that was going to make me happy. That was justice at that time. At the end of that trial, when I gave my impact statement, I ended up telling this young man that, I forgave him. And I really thought and I really thought I was doing the right things. But as the years went on, I found out, again, I was just going through the motions. I hadn't forgiven him from my heart. It was just lip service. Then the judge sentenced him to 25 and a half years in prison. Time went on. I just became more bitter, and I was just kind of stagnated. I would have to go to prison and meet O'Shea to make sure that I still didn't have this hatred and bitterness in my heart for him. In March 2005 is when we went to Stillwater.
So I'm now sitting in this visiting room with the mother of the person that I've murdered over 12 years ago.
The very first thing I said to him was, look, I don't know you. You don't know me. We need to lay a foundation. We need to get to know one another.
No one ever really wants to know about the person that commits a crime. And the fact that she was willing to do that off top, I was just like, wow, I was kind of stunned and amazed.
And that's when he told me about his life, and I told him about my son, and I told him about myself, what I was doing. And he had admitted what he's done.
And I told her, like, wow, we had so many similarities that had we taken the time to communicate, it's possible we could have been wound up friends.
And then I told him, I said, you know what, in court I told you that I have forgiven you. I said, but today, from the bottom of my heart, I want you to know that I forgive you, that I can no longer hold on to you. And I remember him saying, well, ma'am, how can you do that? And I said, because of who is within me, I can do that. I've got to let you go, because I have learned that forgiveness was for me. He asked if he could hug me.
That was my way of saying that I am human. I am trying to understand. I am sorry. She met me around the table and we embraced, and Mary just broke down.
I began to fall. And he had to hold me up. He had to lift me up.
I've been stabbed. I've been in the riots. It's the most terrifying part of my whole prison sentence is watching a mother cry and grieve over her son that I've murdered, and I have to be the one to embrace her and hold her up.
And when he left the room, I bent over and I said, I just hugged the man that murdered my son. I've just hugged the man that murdered my son. And when I stood up, I began to feel something in my feet. And it was just moving, and it moved up, and it moved up, and it moved up until I felt whatever leave me. And I instantly knew that all that hatred, all the bitterness, all the anger that I had in my heart for 12 years, I knew that it was over with, that it was just done. It was gone.
That's the moment when our bond started to form, because at her weakest point, I was able to be there for her.
Their situation is quite unique because not only has Mary clearly forgiven O'Shea, they've really become part of each other's lives. In my early years, I had a hard time with the forgiveness stuff, the F word. That's what it's called in the victim community. I've also witnessed the triviality of how forgiveness is oftentimes talked about. It's very shallow and cheap, in my words and perceptions. It's tossed out there, and oftentimes because you should forgive or you have the pressure, it can be a real blockage. But I have also learned over the years the absolute paradox of forgiveness. People frequently tell me how judgmental it feels. On the other hand, the less you talk about it, and the more you create a safe, if not sacred place, where people feel safe enough to really go deep within themselves, to bring up that energy and wisdom of the heart. If they have a need to travel the path, the journey of forgiveness, they'll bring it up because they feel it's safe.
There's a grace or a presence of something that happens in these rooms where a convicted felon meets with his family's victims. After you go through a murder in your life or in your family of someone you love, you're not the same. You will not trust anyone ever like you did before. He came from behind my father while he was slicing tomatoes at the counter and stabbed him approximately 40 times. And then he picked up the knife that my dad had been slicing tomatoes with and stabbed him another 40 times. They estimate it took him 20 minutes just to stab my father that many times. Then went through my father's house and took everything of value and drove away. And one day the bank called my mother and said that there was someone suspicious trying to cash a check on my father's account for $5,000. And my mom said, call the police. That's who murdered my husband. Of course, then there was a trial. Almost a year later, he was convicted.
She came to me, it was more than 20 years after her father had been killed. I just picked up immediately, instantly, the enormous energy of anger and hurt.
If you're honest with your feelings, they don't wrap up in a little box like that and go away. They're present your whole life.
Most citizens don't understand how the millions and millions of dollars in our criminal justice systems and correction systems are totally offender-focused, with few exceptions. It's a trail 'em, nail 'em, jail 'em, next case. The average victim receives few services, oftentimes feeling twice victimized.
It has layers and layers of hurt upon there, and that doesn't just go away.
The preparation with Pam and the man who killed her dad went on, I believe it was for 2.5 years.
I felt prepared, and I had toured a prison. To see him was horrifying. To know that he still breathes is horrifying to me. On the other hand, it was such a resource. It was a time that I couldn't screw up. It was very apparent to me that I had to do this. And thank God I did.
The pathway to peace is over the mountain of healthy release of anger. It's not like leaping over it, denying it. You are over the mountain.
The first thing I did was tell him my story from start to finish. I think I needed to retell him exactly how this had affected my life. His sorrow was real. When he apologized to me, he talked about how he thought about it on just about every holiday, and that he had took my dad away from my family. I don't know what to call it other than like a moment of grace where two people come together that you never thought come together and hear each other. Does that speak to a definition of forgiveness? Depends on your definition of forgiveness. All the attachments I have to forgiveness, I can say I'm just not ready yet to forgive him. But I can say that I don't feel the way I did before about him either.
Forgiveness has so many different meanings, depending on culture, depending on faith system or secular practices. And I oftentimes refer to it as authentic forgiveness. Authentic forgiveness, to me, is a gift of awakening, a freeing of one's spirit, a release of long-held toxic energy. Forgiveness is more of a direction than a destination, a way of life grounded in a spirit of humility and compassion. It's not about social expectations. It can be totally independent of what the other person does.
Restorative justice views crime as a wound within the community, and justice requires accountability and healing. It's not just punishment for punishment's sake. Restorative justice is about inviting those who are most affected by crime, the key stakeholders, victims and their families and their communities, offenders and their families and communities, holding the person who committed the harm accountable. Restorative justice elevates the role of crime victims in a big way. The truth is, restorative justice can be used at all levels of the criminal justice system. However, in those severe violent cases, those are victim-initiated, not by the courts, not by probation, victim-initiated many years later.
Some victims of crime who have been hurt themselves or their loved one has been killed, their whole purpose of wanting to do this is to forgive. That's part of their journey. For most, that is not. The most powerful examples that I have consistently witnessed of the real energy of forgiveness. The words, oftentimes, frankly, most oftentimes, not there.
I was a Catholic for 64 years of my life. A very strong practicing Catholic. I wasn't a Sunday-only Catholic. I sent my children to parochial school thinking it was the safest place. That's the hurtful part. And now, at age 75, I never go into a Catholic church.
I'm appalled, I'm disgusted, I'm angry with the priest and that type of behavior, but I think I'm more so maybe even with the church and the way the church has responded or failed to respond. The amount of pain has increased significantly because of the church's handling of this situation. In many ways, this community had quieted down, but there was not a healing.
In Milwaukee, at Marquette University, through their restorative justice initiative led by Justice Janine Gasky, who is a former Supreme Court justice, and in working with victim organizations and with leaders in the Catholic Church, they were eventually able to work out agreement on coming together using a restorative justice circle process.
When I left my home that day, I was just getting angrier by the minute as I was driving there. And then there was still anger and yet a calmness when it was your turn to speak. And I had a sense of that around the whole circle as they spoke. My son became friends with a priest who was a teacher at the high school. This priest had been accused of molesting boys, of providing alcohol and drugs in his apartment. At age 18, he left and took his life.
June of 2000, I was assigned pastor of 2 parishes. One of those parishes is a parish where a prior pastor was an abuser of children. And to now have faces and to see the pain live on and on and on and on and on.
I cannot tell you what a nightmare it was to have to bury your child.
They kept it in themselves for so long. They could not communicate or talk about it. And now for that institution to turn around on them and to say that we're not believing you, we're not going to serve you, we're not going to really help you, that was tremendous pain in that.
No one chooses their journey in life, and I certainly would have not chosen this journey. But I feel I'm here today for a reason. I think my son needs his mother to speak for him.
Because what you witness, the level of respect, the level of openness, the energy of almost compassion. I mean, I literally feel and sense that what I would call the authentic energy of forgiveness there more than I do in institutions that talk about a lot or preach it or push it or individuals.
We learned from each other's experiences, good and bad.
The Healing Circle was just a tremendous experience and an eye-opening experience for me. It's a whole different experience to hear the victims themselves, to hear the people talk about the pain.
I understood and recognized that I wasn't ready the first time she approached, so I didn't do it. Thankfully, I held out because when we did have our meeting, it was, as she said, beyond belief. Had I still been that messy person, there's no telling.
Could be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years of preparation. And that is supremely important. Without that, you would not have the consistent positive results that we found to date through research and practice. Clarifying their expectations, their needs, talking about risk of the process and can they deal with that if it happens, all of which kind of helps lower the anxiety.
It had also allowed me the time to decide if I really wanted to do this.
Truthfully, some of the biggest impact of what we've learned from restorative justice is outside the criminal justice system. It's in school settings. It's being applied in university settings, in workplaces, in human rights settings. It's part of transitional justice. It was in South Africa. It is in Liberia. It is in Northern Ireland and many, many other parts of the world. So we're learning restorative justice. Some of its bigger impacts are outside of what we thought.
Restorative justice is truly a social movement in the international community, with endorsements by the United Nations, the European Council, growing number of other countries. The nation of Turkey has passed national legislation to develop victim offender mediation as a form of restorative justice throughout the country. As part of my work with the United Nations Development Program in Turkey and the Ministry of Justice, I helped organize a study tour, and we had very high-level members of Parliament and Ministry of Justice folks and some others travel to Washington, D.C., to New York City to view some of the best practices in America. And they also came to Milwaukee and to Marquette University.
Peace building, it's people-to-people diplomacy.
Restorative dialogue is one of many pathways to a deeper experience of forgiveness. It's about creating a safe place to go deep within your heart, to feel vulnerability, to be open to others' pain, to recognize the humanity at the deepest level. When you humanize your adversary, it's just harder to hold on to hate. It's harder to kill.
I grew up in Phillips neighborhood here. It's near and dear to my heart, always will be. This was a large settlement of Indian people from a lot of reservations around the country. The Somali people started showing up in numbers. I didn't know who they were. As soon as the numbers started growing over time and more came in, I noticed that the conflicts were brewing. People started wondering, how are they getting these businesses? How are they getting these mosques? Why do they get the public housing before our people?
There was a native woman who was assaulted by some Somali youth. So the native community wanted to retaliate. They wanted to come out and, with their baseball bats, and make a big fight.
It's a two-way street. The Somalis aren't just attacking natives. I know native people are attacking Somalis, and be it verbal or physical or both, whatever.
We came from a war-torn country, and we came here for peace. We don't want to fight anymore.
We emailed back and forth and agreed to meet, and we actually met on Martin Luther King Day of 2010.
We have looked for ways how we can solve these issues just through dialogue.
We've been doing monthly meetings, basically, for about 2.5 years now.
Our group is called Native American Somali Friendship Committee.
And we even haggled over who was going to be first, Somali and Native American. But we were here.
They have been here first.
We're doing little steps along the way of finding ways to bring our people together. Different exchanges culturally and just getting to know each other. And in the beginning, it was kind of negative. People were being honest with each other, and people were offended.
To start taking away those labels. It's not that larger community, it's just that person.
So people see us walking through the neighborhood, get that visual, shared food together. Conversations with each other and sharing stories and culture, I think, is going to bring out just more similarities between people.
The case with the Somali and Native American community in Minneapolis, that to me is restorative dialogue at the real level, the real earthy level. They're doing it. If that isn't the real energy of forgiveness, I don't know what is.
When people are sitting beside each other, there's that respect, when you're listening, somebody looking at eye to eye, it really helps. But we've come a long way. Now we have built a relationship. We really understand each other.
I think we put an awareness in the community.
Forgive, learn how to forgive and move forward. Try and hold just a circle and reach out to the community, and that's how I believe we can build a safe neighborhood in our neighborhood.
To spend hours with each other, hearing each other's stories in the energy of pain, in the energy of trauma. This is not little common conversations. I mean, you're going to places where most people would not feel comfortable being.
My experience in the Healing Circle has helped my pastoral work with dealing with victim survivors of clergy sexual abuse because I've become more sensitive to the pain that they suffer and the trauma that has gone on.
I feel that by telling my story, going back in time, I did release a lot of the bitterness and anger that I was carrying.
You can't reverse the history that's already been done. But you also don't have to carry a chip on your shoulder. You don't have to be angry. Talking about restorative dialogue and justice and talking circles, I think we can only get better through that process.
I had the answers. I didn't have to worry anymore and sleepless nights over what had happened in that room.
I can talk to my neighbor. I can reach out to my neighborhood and make a difference in my neighborhood.
What's the wisdom that people who have traveled, walked the hard, gritty path of forgiveness in their lives, what can that teach us?
Should have done the restorative justice process earlier, because it would have been that many more years of not worrying about all that stupid stuff.
If they can come to grips with forgiveness, even if they can't always use the words, somehow can connect with the humanity of the other, that has enormous lessons for those of us who won't ever experience that, perhaps.
I declare this young man as my spiritual son, and he declares me as his mother.
It is real. There's nothing really than forgiveness. There's nothing really than reconciliation. There's nothing in this world definitely more realer than love, and that's what we have between us now.